Actually, he could be, his parents are actually registered at the kennel club thing so that they could really, he could get papers, I guess. So
How long have you had them?
I was just looking at that. I think the end of July I got them. So
Do
about
they live far away?
a month
Did
and a
you
half or
have
2
one
months. I think Lakewood. So
there? My dad used to raise beagles, and on several occasions when he gave them to different farmers, and it wasn't even conveniently close to us, they would make their way back to us.
oh, actually, like when they would run away.
Yes.
Oh gosh,
We'd look out in the driveway, and there'd be one of his beagles that came back.
that's funny. I'm hoping. I don't think that'll be a problem, but yeah.
Well, he got a lot of attention from the girls.
Yes, he did, and he's definitely kind of I call him a ladies' man. He definitely gravitates toward women and things.
Being
So.
with glaucoma, he doesn't stray too much because it became.
Oh, he's plenty curious. Yeah. If they don't close the front door when they're coming home, he'll wander out the front yard and just start walking around because he doesn't know how far he's gone, really. So.
They're amazing, though.
He's got the same eye drops that humans use for glaucoma, and so it's kind of interesting. Yeah, so, kind of unique. So we call this a foster success, in that we set him up for success at his new family. So we're pretty excited about that. So, yep.
How old is he?
He's 3, young dog.
He's got along.
Yeah. He's got a great personality. He's fantastic. He's gonna be a great dog. So, all right. Well, let's begin with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here safely today. Thank you for the rain to water the earth and to bring things to growth. Continue to watch over all those who need your guidance, your protection, your healing, your restoration in body, mind, spirit, and relationships. Give us your Holy Spirit today as we study your word. Help us to be strengthened in our faith and rejoicing in your mercies for us. And these things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So we just had Eleazar transferred as Joshua anointed as the successor to Moses. Joshua kind of rising to prominence when he brought back, when he was one of the spies that went over into Canaan 40 years ago to check things out and came back. He gave a good report, not one of fear and, we can't take him or anything. That was 10 of the spies. But he and Caleb came back bold and said, yep, we should trust in the Lord and we should go in and take him. And the Lord remembered that, and so now Joshua is being appointed as leader in Moses' place, as Moses will soon be gathered to his people. And I say soon, but like a book and a half away yet. So we got to finish Numbers, and then we have the whole book of Deuteronomy, which is kind of Moses' I don't know how to describe it, his
swan song.
Yeah, sort of his last will and testament sort of thing. And so Joshua was anointed there, and I think we talked a lot about ordination and stuff like that last week too, just the laying on of hands and things. So chapter 28 and following here recap the liturgical cycles of Israel, starting with the daily offering of the morning and the evening, with the flour and the oil, and where to pour out the drink offerings. That's the daily. Then the weekly offering on the Sabbath, 2 male lambs a year old, and so this is in addition to those things. So from daily, weekly, then monthly. At the beginning of your months, offer 2 bulls, a ram, 7 male lambs, and other things, drink offerings, and those things as well. So even as they go from the daily to weekly, monthly, the offerings are also are more extravagant, more involved, bulls instead of just a daily lamb. And then the yearly offerings, the festivals that the Lord has appointed. Passover, and again, he just sort of recaps the whole Passover thing. We've been over that more than a couple times. Then the Feast of Weeks, so booths, Feast of Booths, Pentecost. Not booths, the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, booths is later on, sorry. How they celebrate that. The Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah. The Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And then the Feast of Booths. Again, interesting because, you know, he's already appointing a festival to do a yearly remembrance of their wanderings and of their time in the wilderness, even before it's over. So this is 7 days worth of offerings.
Is the Lord telling Moses to set up all these?
It's yes, this is Moses recapping what the Lord had commanded him. So again, just a reminder and a reestablishing as they're transitioning these things.
They had a lot of feasts, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. Chapter 30 is about taking vows and binding themselves to those vows. If a man vows a vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds from his mouth. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything more comes from the evil one. So if you commit yourself to something, let your word be your bond. It has to do with not only the 8th commandment, but also it's almost a second commandment binding of not using the Lord's name in vain. As one who is called by the Lord's name, was one of the Lord's people, if you commit yourself to something, one of God's people commits themselves to something, and then they go back on it, then you profane the name of the Lord by which you are called. So it really discredits the Lord as well. And then women in vows. If a woman makes a vow and binds herself to it while she's still in her father's house and her father hears the pledge, then she's bound to it. But if her father opposes the bond, and he can overrule that bond, he can overrule that vow, and if her father opposes to that, if she marries if she marries a husband while under her vows, or any thoughtless utterance of her lips which she has bound herself, and her husband hears of it and says nothing, then her vow stands. But if when her husband hears it, he opposes her, then the Lord will forgive her and she will be released from it. So this is kind of the idea of, and notice it's a vow or any thoughtless utterance of her lips. And I think that's in the men's. Doesn't say the sort of thoughtless utterance, but he shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. It's kind of that same idea that even if you utter something recklessly or carelessly, well, you're bound to it. You know, stick to your word. So don't try to bargain with God when you're in distress, because you're binding yourself to things. So.
I have a question about the word vow.
Mm-hmm.
What all would that encompass? When I think about vow, I think of, when we have to make marriage vows and those kind of vows.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds like it's maybe something a little less than that.
Hold on one second. Let me grab a book. Look up a definition here real quick for it. Talk amongst yourselves.
Vow is what you bond in jeopardy.
That's right. Yeah.
Not Jeopardy, that's the other show. You got your shows mixed up, you don't buy vows. Wheel of
Or
Fortune.
Wheel of Fortune. You buy a vow.
By the way, I'm taking up a collection to send him out to be on the show, because everybody that's on there is an idiot but my husband. They get so mad because when they don't see that there's 3 Z's and they pick another letter instead, and they could have had all that money, and then they solve the puzzle. He's like, what crazy people. I should take it some night.
Oh, no. They won't have insurance.
So your question is to whether, how, to what magnitude are these talking about?
What are they talking about when they say vow?
What would be
Like
an
you
example?
vow, when you became ordinated, you made a vow. And when we became married, we made a vow, and. We did? I think we did. And, so that seems like a pretty serious giving over of oneself.
Yeah, the word here is a binding by a pledge. I mean, these are commitments of substance. I mean, these are substantial sort of commitments. So whether it be a Nazirite vow, or a promise to fulfill a business transaction, or a commitment in marriage, things like that. These are definitely and with the seriousness that they're being treated, like if you make this vow, you are bound to it, unless somebody who has sort of civil authority over you, like when you're a child or a woman in the household still, then the responsibility for that pledge really is, if somebody's under 18, they need to have their parent's signature kind of thing. That's kind of the same idea here. If you're under the authority of your parents, then that's kind of where the buck stops. Within the household, the buck stops with the husband, those kind of things. So these are binding pledges of legality.
Okay.
And so kind of that idea of this is like your signature.
Okay, or, for instance, like if somebody vowed to give a ram for a sacrifice, then that would come under that category.
Correct. Yep. So if you have a time where you're like, Lord, if you get me out of this, and I'll sacrifice 2 bulls to you, and he gets you out of it, and it's like, maybe I can just get away with a lamb. You made your vow. You got to stick to that. Yep, you got to stick to those things. I think of Luther in the thunderstorm saying, Lord, if you get me out, well, he's praying to St. Anne at that point, but he's, if you get me out of this, I'll become a monk. And he follows through with it, so yeah, this is about being a person of integrity and of your word. So,
Thank you.
yeah,
So
these
there
are,
must be something in these scriptures, because for the man it's 1 verse, and for the women it's 13.
yeah, and I think it has to do with just, who has responsibility for the woman and those sorts of things. That the woman is in a submissive role within the household. The husband's the head of the household, so how does that play in? There would be question of, well, the woman made the vow, but does she really have the authority to make that vow? Well, if the husband didn't know about it, then, but if he did know about it and didn't say anything, then he can, if he wants to nullify it, he can. But if he doesn't nullify it, then they're bound to it. So, yeah. This kind of comes up later on, too. There's, who was it? Some king comes back from a battle and says, whatever comes out of my house first, I'll sacrifice it to the Lord. And it's his daughter. And yeah, it's a weird story. It's really a weird account of things. So, yeah. Verse 9, if a vow of a widow or divorced woman, anything which she has bound herself shall stand against her, meaning if you're a single woman and you're not under the authority of your father's household anymore or a husband's household, then you stand on your own pledge then. So it's not as though women don't have the ability to stand on their own. They do if they're not in another relationship. So, yep. All right. So that's binding to vows there. Basically, if you're going to make a promise, you stick to it. It's one of the reasons why, for a long time, the church has taken issue with bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is kind of saying, it's kind of going back on your word to say, I would pay this, and then you could declare bankruptcy and you say, I'm not going to pay it. So seventh commandment, not stealing, versus oath keeping as well. So something to keep in mind with that is why perhaps that's been opposed in the past and things. It's the concept of bankruptcy in our current economic and legal arrangement right now, I think might be different than exactly breaking a vow and things like that. It's sometimes it's a legitimate way of negotiating with creditors and things like that. So I'm not making a declaration on a blanket declaration on bankruptcy or something like that. But the baseline is if you put your name to something, then keep your word.
You know, even though you can get bankruptcy could be legal and all that, you still have a moral obligation to fulfill. Go ahead and take the bankruptcy, but you know, I've got a debt over here and I need to pay it.
Yep.
I need to work on it.
Yeah. Yep. Kind of why we would oppose something like just sort of blanket amnesty for debt. You know, we put our name to something. We owe this. We should follow through with it. All right. Vengeance for Midian. So we've had a little bit of an excursus here with Aaron dying and Joshua being appointed. A little recap on some laws and structures to things. Back into some narrative things here now. The Lord says to Moses, "Avenge the people of Israel on the Midianites. Afterward you shall be gathered to your people." So Moses is like, okay, Moses, this is your last hurrah. Take vengeance on the Midianites who had wanted to, with Balaam and all those sorts of things, and then the women enticed the Israelite men into marriages and visiting their feasts and idolatry and things like that. So Moses spoke to the people and said, "Arm men from among you for the war, that they may go against Midian to execute the Lord's vengeance on Midian. Send 1,000 from each of the tribes to go to war." So 12,000. And Moses sent them to war, 1,000 from each tribe, together with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest. Who was Phinehas again? Remember what Phinehas did? It's sort of a Midianite thing. They were marrying everybody, and everybody started dying, and God killed all these people. And while they were mourning those people, an Israelite man came by with a Gentile woman and took her into the tent of marriage. And while they were consummating the marriage, Phinehas ran them through with a spear. Both of them, 2 for 1. So Phinehas kind of became a bit of a hero there in that respect. And so now when you're going up against the Midianites again, who's going to go to battle kind of on the front lines? General Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest. And they took with them the vessels of the sanctuary and the trumpets for the alarm in his hand. So these would be the silver trumpets. Remember those silver trumpets that we had talked about? Then they would use them for war calls and things like that. So they're taking those. It's likely that the Ark of the Covenant would go before them as well. This says the vessels of the sanctuary. I don't know how many cups and saucers and plates they brought with them exactly, but we do know later on that indeed the Ark of the Covenant goes before them. And this is sort of God's way of going to battle along with his people. Take the ark with you so that you can see that the Lord is on your side. The Lord fights on your side if you're doing what the Lord has commanded. So they warred against Midian, as the Lord commanded Moses, and killed every male. They killed the kings, and they killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with the sword. So there's Balaam's end in verse 8. He died there as well. So again, there's another question as to, well, had he thrown in again with the Midianites to be among them as opposed to fleeing from the godless? And that's sort of, again, tracing into the sin of Balaam is to compromise with unbelievers for your own comfort. And the people of Israel took captive the women of Midian and their little ones, and they took as plunder cattle, flocks, and goods. And the cities where they lived, the encampments, they burned with fire, and they took all the spoil of the plunder. And they brought back the captives and the spoil to Moses and to the people of Israel at the camp on the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. So this was just across the way. So they met outside the camp, and Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands who had come from service, and he said, "Have you let all the women live? Behold, these, on Balaam's advice, caused the people of Israel to act treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor, and so the plague came upon the congregation of the Lord." I bet Phineas is kind of saying, yeah, I remember that. "So therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known man by lying with him. But the young girls who have not known man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Encamp outside the camp 7 days, whoever has killed any person and touched any slain, to purify yourselves, and then they may come back in." So, yeah, well, I mean, and it's pretty harsh, but at the same time, what the baseline judgment that God had against the Midianites was that all of them should die. I mean, that was the just retribution for their godlessness, for their rebellion, and for standing up against God, would have been for all deserve death. And instead, he allows the young girls, the virgins, so whatever, 12 years and under, maybe 10 years old and under, or whatever it might be, maybe older too, if they I don't know how old they would go up to without knowing a man, not married. But the purpose of killing the women who had known men was that they would not, by marriage and enticement, lead people into false worship as they had at Peor already. They were already guilty of leading the people of Israel astray. Therefore, God exercises judgment on them. So, the wages of sin is death. Sin is a harsh reality. The question is sometimes isn't so much why did God choose to put all these to death? It's more, why did God choose to allow us to live? And because of Christ. So verse 21, Eleazar said, here's what you've been commanded about the spoils. Take the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, tin, and lead, things that can stand with the fire. That's clean, purified with water. And if it can't go through the fire, then you shall pass it through water. So sort of a ritual baptizing, purifying of the spoils of war. And wash all your clothes. On the seventh day you shall be clean, and then you can come back into camp. So even the act of doing God's justice, of putting those to death, still required a cleansing afterwards before they could come back into the camp. And then they divide up the plunder. Man and beast. Obviously there were no men left, but mankind, people and of animals, divide these things up into two parts. First, the warriors that went out to battle, and then everybody else. So half goes to the people who actually did the fighting, and half goes to the rest of the congregation of Israel. And then a tribute to the Lord, both from those who went out to battle and those who remained in the camp, in the congregation. So if you went out, the tribute from the men who went out to battle, 1/500th. So if you got 1,000 animals, the Lord gets 2. So 1/500th of the people and of the oxen, of the donkeys, and of the flocks. Take it from their half, give it to the priest. And from Israel's half, from the congregation, 1/50th, one drawn out of every 50 of the people. So 1/50th of Israel's portion goes to the Lord. So then they add up the plunder. They got a little plundering list here. So from the army, they took 675,000 sheep. That's a lot of sheep. 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 persons, women not known man by lying with him. You're talking about, this is a big population. I mean, out of that population, you get 32,000 virgins. I mean, you got to figure at least a mom and a dad for each one of those, and then plus, whatever else. I mean, that's a big group of people. So of the 600 and the half, the portion of those who had gone out with the army numbered 337,500 sheep, and the Lord's tribute was 675. So 1 for every 500, so 2 out of every 1,000. The cattle was 36,000. The Lord got 72. He got 61 donkeys, and he got 32 persons. I'm not clear about what would happen with those young ladies, if they would go into service in the temple or be raised as adopted housemaids or servants in there. But remember what the Lord has said about those who are brought into a household, whether they're a foreigner or whether an Israelite. If they are a slave or a servant in your household, how are they supposed to be treated? As if they are part of your household. So we're not looking at slavery, it may be in the sense that we might think of it, but God had commanded a responsibility of care for those individuals.
Would this be because those young people were product of the Midianites' sexual immorality and lifestyle? And so was he looking upon them as a certain, where it was the sins of the parents and their immoral lifestyle that produced these children, therefore he would not kill them and take them into their families and raise them? I mean,
Yeah, it is an interesting thing that these 32,000 are spared and are integrated into the nation of Israel. It is an interesting thing that, a remnant from even unbelievers can be grafted into the people of God. I think there's sort of a gospel aspect to that too, for sure. So that was what came from the warriors, and that was brought to Eleazar for the temple, and for the Levites probably would be the ones using all that and managing all that. And from the congregation's half, they got 1/50th of all that, and so they do the math on all those things. And they said, we've brought everything, we've brought all the gold, we've brought everything. It's in order to make atonement for ourselves. And verse 51, Moses and Eleazar received all the gold and the crafted articles, and it weighed about 16,750 shekels. And this is mentioning in particular of the gold articles. A shekel is about 2/5 of an ounce. I did a little math. And when you add that all up, and at today's gold prices of $1,700 per ounce, it's about $12 million worth of gold in today's money. So has inflation really improved all that much? I don't know. So you think it's because it's like 400 pounds of gold or something like that. So you think that'd be, So they received the gold and brought it into the tent of meeting as a memorial for the people of Israel before the Lord. So there they, it was brought into the Lord's keeping, into the treasury. So Israel's maybe not hurting for resources now at this point. All right, Reuben and Gad. We get a little sibling rivalry sort of thing with among the tribes, tribal rivalry here and things. So now the people of Reuben and the people of Gad had a very great number of livestock. And they saw the land of Jazer on the land of Gilead, and behold, the place was a place for livestock. So good pasture land kind of stuff. And this is west of the Jordan area, west of the Transjordan area. So they're like, hey, we got a lot of animals. We kind of like this land. And that's what they're going to propose. So the people of Gad and the people of Reuben came and said to Moses and Eleazar and to the chiefs of the congregation, they list off their names, the land that the Lord struck down before the congregation is good for livestock. If we found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan. So they want to stay outside the promised land because the land looks pretty good. And Moses was not happy at this idea. He said, shall your brothers go to war while you sit here? Basically, will you discourage the hearts of the people of Israel by going over to the land that the Lord has given? Why will you discourage them by not going over? Your fathers did this when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. So he's kind of recapping here. It's like, look, they wanted to stay outside the land too, and everybody's heart was discouraged from this, and the Lord's anger was kindled, and the whole 40 years in the wandering thing, kind of recaps them all of that. And it made us wander, and now you've risen up to do the same evil against the Lord. Verse 15, if you turn away from following him, he will again abandon them in the wilderness and destroy all of this people. Then they came near and said to him, we'll build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities for our little ones, but we will take up arms, ready to go before the people of Israel, until we have brought them into their place. And our little ones shall live in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We won't return to our homes until the people of Israel have gained an inheritance. So their bargain is, no. We'll set up our stuff here. We'll still go and fight for you. In fact, we'll send our men in, and we'll even go ahead of you. We'll go on the front lines of this. But when it's all over, we're going to come back over here, and this is where we want to live, out this way. We'll say that our inheritance is on the east side of the Jordan. So Moses said, if you will do this and take up arms, and every armed man of you pass over with us until he's driven them out, and the land is subdued, then after that you shall return and be free of obligation to the Lord, to Israel. This land shall be your possession. But if you do not do so, behold, you've sinned against the Lord, and your sin will be found out. And so build your cities and do what you have promised. And
It was just the two tribes, huh?
they said, so it was Gad, Reuben, and half of Manasseh. Yeah, half the tribe of Manasseh as well.
So was that a demonstration of lack of faith?
So that was Moses' first sort of inclination. That was his first accusation. It's like, what, you're gonna abandon us here? You're not gonna go in, just like you wouldn't go in when things looked too tough before. And they said, no, we'll go in still. But they saw that the land was good, and so they, like, hey, we just conquered this land. Can we keep it? We'd like to have our inheritance out here instead of crossing over into that land. So, maybe there is something to that. Like, what, you don't think there's enough pasture land in Canaan for everything that the Lord has promised to give you, and things like that? So it's possible. But in the end, they say, no, we're still going to fulfill our duty of helping to conquer it. But, let's not let this land go to waste out here either. So it seems like the Lord is agreeable to it.
I ask it because, I certainly see why they were thinking that, it looks good. I wasn't there.
Right.
I'm here now, looking
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting parallel between Abraham and Lot dividing up the pasture land. And, Lot sort of sees the good land, and he's sort of like, well, I'm going to take the good land. And Abraham, you can take the rest of the land. And the Lord blesses Abraham anyway with it. And I think maybe there's a bit of a parallel there. They've got the bird in the hand rather than the two in the bush. And they're like, kind of like what we got here. I don't know if we want to risk it. And so they do go, but they do promise to fight. And so verse 33 says, so Moses gave to them the people of Gad and Reuben and half tribe of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the kingdom of the Ammonites, the Amorites and Bashan and all those. And they list all the cities that they got and where they set things up and got rid of the Amorites that lived there and all these things. Chapter 33 is a sort of a recap of the journey out of Egypt to where they are today. So sort of a quick summary of all these things. We get a couple of little details in here which are interesting. They set out from Ramses, the city or region of Ramses, on that first day. And verse 4 says, while the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn who the Lord had struck down among them, on their gods also the Lord executed judgments. It's remembering that each of those plagues that God had exacted on them was a foil or a counter to one of the Egyptian gods of their pantheon. God of the Nile, he strikes the Nile. God of the air, he strikes the air. So, and we get sort of their travel itinerary here. They go from Ramses to Succoth to Etham and all these different places, and where they camp, and then they go here, and then they camp, and then they go there. They camp here, and then they go there. From Elam, they set out to the Red Sea, and then the wilderness of Sin. And there, they go to there, to there, to there. From Alush, they camped at Refuge, where there was no water for the people to drink. Remember where that happened? And the Lord provided the water. They went from here to there, to here, to there, to here, to there, to here, to there. So it's like Moses had been keeping track of their travels in a record, and so then he inserted it into the book of in the wilderness. So it's like, all right, we're about to get here. Here's our travel log. If Moses were around today, this would be the dad keeping track of the gas mileage while you're on a trip. You'd have the notebook in the glove box kind of thing. So that seems to be what this is. This might have been on its own scroll at one point or something like that, and then they incorporated it. Moses incorporated it into his book about their wilderness travelings. So. We have no idea. Yeah, we have no idea how long they stayed at any one place. Not necessarily. There was, because when it was talking about how when the cloud stopped, they would stop, and when it would go up, it would go up. And in that list, it sort of, when it was describing that, it did say, if it was there for a short time, they stayed a short time. If it was there a long time, they stayed a long time. So it varied from instance to instance. So my guess is it wasn't just overnight kind of stuff, because a group that large, how a big long train takes a long time to stop? You get a long group of people like that, it takes a while to get everybody stopped and set up and then going again. So there's a certain amount of logistics involved with that. So lots of places where they stayed. And here in verse 37, they end up from Kadesh to the camping at Mount Hor at the edge of the land of Edom. And that's where Aaron died at 123 years old. And then they camped here and there again, a few different places. And verse 48, they set out from the mountains of Abarim to the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. And that's where they planted. verse 50. So there's their whole travel log if you want to. And the trouble is, a lot of those places we don't know the exact locations of. You know, they were recorded, but we don't necessarily know where they ended up being. Some of your maps might have a general idea of where it was, but you got 40 years to wander. It's not going to be a straight line.
So this is all the southern, the southern end of the Jordan River.
Yes.
Close to the Dead Sea.
Mm-hmm.
This is where they're at now.
Yes. Let me,
A long way from the Sea of Galilee. All right.
let's see. I had a, I looked at a map earlier today. Oh, yeah, here it
Yes,
is.
I'm looking here.
Yeah, here we go. There you go. So, you know, we don't know exactly where each and every one of these places might have been, but in general, traveling out of Goshen, crossing the Red Sea, along here somewhere, Mount Sinai, down at the end of the Sinai Peninsula, this coming up to this way to go into, you know, send the spies in. And when that didn't work, then they're sort of all around in, you know, in this area, and they end up coming through Midian up into this region. And here's the Jordan and the Dead Sea.
So Canaan, or the land that the Lord promised them, is on the east side of the Jordan River?
West
West,
side.
okay.
Yeah, here's the Jordan.
So they're between the Jordan and the Mediterranean.
Correct. Where it is today.
So when they were traveling, was it like tent-type structures?
Yes, they had tents.
Okay. So in the surrounding areas, were there more brick and mortar type buildings?
So it talks about building fortified cities.
Yes, right.
That would be stone and brick and, you know, whatever else they might do to. Yeah, yeah. Think, you know, Southwest and well, think what you see the Bedouins and, you know, Palestinians and things building now, other than concrete structures. You know, you see those rural areas and it's, you know, mud brick kind of structures and stuff. So that was the fortified cities and things. You know, and we have archaeological evidence of a lot of cities there in these regions, including like Jericho and some of these more well-known ones, but some of the smaller ones as well. There are all these, you know, the archaeology does come across these fortified cities, and they can determine when they were destroyed based on. So they'll talk about they'll level the city and burn it with fire, and there will be a layer of burned rubble, and then on top of that they'll build another city, and on top of that they'll build another city, and archaeologists will be able to sort of go down through that and say, okay, we're finding artifacts consistent with this time period at this level, and then this level down here, and then that level down there. So
I didn't realize that fortified cities meant that versus like economy and wealth or something. Like fortified, I get it.
yeah, strongholds. I mean, yeah, literally, you know, castles.
Were they setting up a temple every time they stopped also?
The tabernacle, yes. Yep, because that's where the glory cloud that was leading them would rest. Yep.
Wow, look at the first carvings, huh? Almost.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
So,
Many hands make light work. So, I mean, there were at least a lot of them to do the work, but it definitely was quite a production to get it set up and taken down. Although that's a good example of how quickly you can do the logistics of it if you're coordinated and if you have experience with it. You can set up pretty elaborate encampments pretty quickly when it's coordinated.
They had 40 years of practice.
40 years.
Yeah, you end up getting pretty good at it, right? Yep.
And they still run them.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. All right, so the Lord is preparing them to cross the Jordan. to go to take the promised land. And so he gives them their basic instructions for what to do with the inhabitants of the land. So we're in 33, verse 50. Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you pass over, you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you and destroy all their figured stones and destroy all their metal images and demolish all their high places. So what is God's first priority?
Destroy
Idolatry.
thing.
Destroy the idolatry. You know, the figured stones mean, you know, the carved idols, all those sorts of things, and their high places. I mean, that were literally up on hillsides and things. That's a pretty common. It's sort of a universally common thing among humanity that the places of worship tend to be up on hills and mountains, and things that are up. Even the Tower of Babel, when they said, we're going to build something, and they didn't build it big, they built it tall. They want to make a monument to themselves. It's the ziggurats. It's these are the tall things. You go on the tops of mountains, and I mean, there's something about that with the divinity. God being above us, but heavens being above us, and so that's sort of built into humanity. Even the Greek pantheon, where did they live? They lived on Mount Olympus. You look through even England, sort of pre-English history, pre-Saxon history in England. They have all these primitive Stone Age sort of locations and places of worship that they find. They're on hillsides, hilltops.
St. Paul's Valley City and Zion on the hill.
We're up on the hills, right? Yep.
I just read something where there was, in Europe, in the early days, when they built a church, it had to be the highest building in the area. The cross is the first thing you should see when you're entering that community, that village or whatever.
Yep, they wanted the steeple. They wanted that to be the highest point
That was
in the area all around. And actually, interestingly, the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., by statute, by design, is the tallest point. The top of those steeples is the highest point in Washington, D.C.
And there's something on the top of that refers to God, if I'm not mistaken.
At the cathedral?
No, at the Washington Monument?
Washington Monument is just a point.
Yeah, but there's something on the top, inscribed on the top of that.
Oh, is there? Oh, I didn't know that.
I just read that not too long ago.
Well, the National Cathedral is actually taller. It's higher in elevation than the Washington Monument. So, yep. All right. And verse 53, take the possession of the land, and you shall inherit the land by lot according to your clans. So they're gonna cast lots to divvy up the territories that you have there. Verse 55, and this is the biggest piece of foreshadowing for the rest of the Old Testament. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, then those of them whom you let remain shall be as barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall trouble you in the land where you dwell. And I will do to you as I thought to do to them.
And ain't it the truth?
Is this where they gave the areas to each tribe, each of the 12 tribes?
Not yet.
They stretch clear down to almost below the Dead Sea.
Yes, yeah. So the Dead Sea is sort of the southern border of Canaan, and the Sea of Galilee is sort of the northern boundary of
Tribes
Galilee.
of color, and they're square down here. Simeon.
Yeah, Simeon goes down there into the Philistines area. Yep, and it becomes, the Gaza Strip is kind of what we talk about now. So, so think about then the history of Israel that's about to unfold in their time there. They will indeed leave some inhabitants undriven, and those are the ones like the Philistines and all these others that end up becoming as barbs in your eyes and thorns in your side. They're the ones that keep bringing up Baal worship and Asherah worship and leading them off into false worship and idolatry. And the Lord continues to have to visit judgment on them to bring them back to repentance and to being his people again. Everything from the cycle of Judges to the Philistines through David and Saul and to ultimately the exiles into Babylon and these areas all stem from this concept. This fundamental thing that if they had driven everybody out, it would have been a different story.
Yeah, then David wouldn't have had anybody to fight.
Well, wouldn't have needed to, yeah.
So when they
Well, and it's even the concept of a king came from the fact that the people around them all had kings, and so they said, we want a king like everybody around us has. And God kind of says, you should have killed them all anyway. And besides, I'm your king. You don't need a king. And so even that idea that they didn't wipe everybody out enticed them to have a king that they didn't need to have. They didn't need to have that.
So did they determine, well, the tribes obviously were of different numbers,
Yes.
each tribe. So is that how they determined? Because you look, Benjamin, Dan, and was that Zebulun up north there? They got very little territory, but Manasseh and some of these others got huge territories. So they determined that by the population of that tribe?
So they cast lots for the land, and so we see in the casting of lots God's direction, God directing those things.
Yeah.
So we also have in chapter 34 here then the laying out of the boundaries as they're coming in. So they cast lots for them, and they divvied them up, and we would say that the Lord is laying out for them their territories because of that. And really remember, Jacob had already blessed the 12 tribes way back in Genesis he blessed each one of them specifically with blessings that would ultimately relate to their territories and their lifeline once they entered the land of Canaan. It's very interesting. It's very interesting how it was prophetic. They were prophetic blessings on the sons who are the patriarchs of the various tribes. It's very interesting. It definitely does, and it definitely plays itself out. So chapter 34 lays out the boundaries. The Lord spoke. Oh, yeah, yeah.
I wanted to comment on the Washington Monument.
Oh, okay.
And it says, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Laos Deo, which means praise to God. That's what's written now.
Oh, okay.
Lausdeo.
Yeah, Laos Deo. Yeah, so, yeah, like laudate. Yeah, it means praise God.
So that's what's written.
Okay. Cool. See if they have a map here. Yeah. So they, where'd it go? There it is. All right. So when you enter the land of Canaan, the land of Canaan is defined by its borders. Your south side shall be the wilderness of Zin along Edom. The southern border shall run from the end of the Salt Sea on the east. So he's kind of laying out for you, here's what Canaan, here's what the promised land actually is.
Entire area of Canaan now.
Yes.
This is not where they divided up then.
Right. Your border shall turn south of these places through Zin and, pass along there and to the brook of Egypt, and its limit shall be the sea, so the Mediterranean. For the western border, you shall have the great sea and its coast. This shall be your western border, so you got the Mediterranean. Your northern border, from the great sea, you shall draw a line to Mount Hor. And from Mount Hor, draw a line to Lebo Hamath, and limit the border shall be Zedad. So wherever those things are, that's how it all lays out. And for the eastern border, you draw a line there. And the border shall go down to the Jordan, and its limit shall be the Salt Sea, defined by its borders all around. So then sort of laying out, there's the property. This land you shall inherit by lot, which the Lord has commanded to give to the 9 tribes and to the half tribe, because the other 2 tribes are on the other side. And then you got the Levites.
So it looks like geographically, Jerusalem was right in the middle.
It is pretty close to right in the middle. Yeah. It's not till later on that Jerusalem becomes the holy city. I mean, even David didn't, he was still outside of Jerusalem. So and then from 16 on, they list the heads of the tribes. So these are the tribal chiefs that they have. And then the cities for the Levites. So the Levites aren't going to get a possession of land, but they are going to get cities in all the lands where the Levites will dwell. And when you think about it, it's kind of good. If you have the tabernacle in one particular place, and if you were to have all the Levites there, the Levites were not just responsible for the tabernacle, but also for the instruction of the people and the maintaining of the worship life and the literacy, the spiritual literacy of all of Israel. And by setting up cities all around there, all around the promised land, then you've got Levites interspersed among the whole nation.
Like bishops almost.
Yeah, kind of like that. Kind of each has a little diocese to sort of keep track of things.
Where did they specify the tabernacle should be?
Yeah, so the tabernacle is going to end up.
Change location, or did they keep it in a certain spot?
Over time, it did move to a few different places, but it's outside of Jerusalem. And why can't I think of the name of the city right now? Until Solomon builds the temple, it's residing outside of Jerusalem. It's sitting near there, and I can't remember the name of it. Yeah, I'm not sure. So, but what's important about the Levites' land is that their cities become important places of refuge within Israel. So there are certain legal protections that these cities provide people. So we'll get into that in just a second here. But so the people give the Levites some as inheritance, some of their possessions as cities to dwell in, and pasture lands around the cities, and that's where they dwell. They get 1,000 cubits all around, so whatever that means, however big those things are. The cities that verse 6. The cities that you give to the Levites shall be the 6 cities of refuge, where you shall permit the manslayer to flee. In addition to them, you shall give 42 cities. So there were 48 cities and pasture lands that they received, 6 of which were these special cities of refuge, which we'll get into in just a minute. And as for the cities that you shall give from the possession, from the larger tribes you shall take many, from the smaller tribes you shall take few, in proportion to the inheritance it inherits. You shall give of its cities to the Levites. So there's something that is proportionate. We are seeing that it's being given out in proportion to the size of the tribes, realizing that they're different sizes. And not by birth order. The firstborn isn't getting the best and the most, necessarily, which is kind of interesting. All right. Have you heard about the cities of refuge before?
Only in the United States.
Oh, well, okay. All right, so, I mean, there is kind of something to that.
Doesn't it come up in the New Testament also? No?
trying to think of when it might have. Not necessarily. Well, we'll go into them. So it says that, verse 11, you shall select cities to be the cities of refuge, that the manslayer who kills any person without intent may flee there. The cities shall be a refuge from the avenger, that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation for judgment. So the idea is, if you accidentally kill somebody, you're out in the field and you're swinging an axe and the axe head falls off, it hits the guy in the head and he dies. Or you're driving your cart and you hit the guy and he dies. Or you have a fight and one falls down the stairs and he's dead. It's like you didn't commit murder. He died, but without intent to kill him.
It'd be more like manslaughter today.
And that's why we've translated that word as a manslayer. Not a murderer, but accidentally causing death. You're driving and you have a car accident, somebody dies. You're not guilty of murder unless you drove at them to run them down. You'd be guilty of manslaughter. It's a secondary type of offense having to do with intent. The idea behind the city of refuge is that, so if you kill somebody, God had already provided that if you kill somebody unintentionally, then you would stand trial and there would be retribution, made. You would make payment for that loss and to make up for it. But if you committed murder, then that person's family would hunt you down and kill you. The idea behind the cities of refuge is that if you commit manslaughter and the family of the person who died just sees it as murder, they're going to come after you to kill you, but you deserve to stand trial to establish that. So you can flee to one of the cities of refuge, and the avenging party, the posse, can't come in there to grab you and kill you from in there. You have to stand trial to establish whether it was manslaughter or murder, and then what the punishment should be. So it was a place where they could, and it's not to escape justice, but it was a place to escape so that justice could be carried out in fairness, so that it wasn't just mob rule, that there would be a place that you could flee and know you had safety until the trial could actually take place.
Was there anybody there to keep these people from leaving? If they, let's say they wanted to run away from it, the whole thing.
So these are the Levite cities. These are the Levitical cities, so they'd be among the Levites there. At that point, if you were going to try to circumvent justice, if you're going to try to flee at that point, then you'd have other punishments, because then you're trying to circumvent judgment by rejecting God. All right? And there's going to be 6 cities of refuge, 3 cities beyond the Jordan, and 3 cities in the land of Canaan for the cities of refuge. So there'd be somewhere close. You'd have one north, middle, and south. North, middle, and south. They're refuge for the people of Israel, for the stranger or the sojourner. Anyone who kills a person without intent may flee there. But if he struck him down with an iron object so that he died, he is a murderer and shall be put to death. If he struck him down with a stone tool that could cause death and he died, he's a murderer, put to death. A wooden tool could cause death. So if you assault with a deadly weapon is not manslaughter, that's murder. So this is what we're getting here. Does that all sound familiar? Like, this is kind of our legal definitions of things? And this was probably the legal definitions of things beyond just Israel. This was probably how things were defined in that time. This would not have been necessarily unfamiliar to the people. Like, oh, so you can't just hit somebody over the head with a deadly object? Oh, wow. Boy, that's new. I'm glad you said something, because I was just, okay, we'll write that down as don't hit with iron object. Okay, I got that. Thank you for letting us know that. So the avenger of blood shall himself put the murderer to death. When he meets him, put him to death. So basically saying, the family member, there's, somebody can have that justice. That's like a plot in so many movies, isn't it? Like, you killed my father, prepare to die. My name is Inigo Montoya. Verse 20, if he pushed him out of hatred or hurled something at him while lying in wait or struck him down with his hand so that he died, then he who struck the blow shall be put to death. He is a murderer. They can put him to death. But if he pushed him suddenly without enmity or hurled without lying in wait, it's like, I'm gonna beat him over the head with this rock. I'm gonna beat him with this rock. There's the premeditated nature of it. Yep. Then, there's all these different circumstances. Then the congregation shall judge between the manslayer and the avenger in accordance with these rules. So, they'll have to do a trial to say, well, maybe it was murder. Maybe it was manslaughter. We'll find out. We'll have to do a trial. What's the case here?
Our Bible uses the same phrase that they use nowadays, I hear, in court cases with malice aforethought.
Yep.
You hear that in the court cases today.
And I'm guessing that's where the court cases got the language, was from here, not the other way around. No, I'm serious. I mean, our jurisprudence is definitely based on a lot of this kind of stuff. Where's that?
I just wrote it somewhere somehow.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you're guilty of premeditated murder, God is outlining here that you can be put to death for that, and that's capital punishment as well. God gives to the authority of the government the right to take life when judged appropriately. That capital punishment is authorized by God to be carried out as a matter of justice, that is allowed. You can't say that capital punishment is unbiblical. It's not. Capital punishment is biblical. It is permitted by God, and it has to be. It's given to an order of justice, and it has to be established that should be the due punishment. It's not given to one person to carry that out, but it has to be done in accordance with justice. But it is authorized by God to have. Romans 13 is the other place where it speaks specifically of the rulers having the authority of the sword to punish evildoers. Yep.
How would you rephrase malice aforethought in layman's terms?
Intent to do harm, intent to kill. You thought ahead of time to do harm of death, to cause his death. Yeah.
If you tell some people that our justice system is based upon the Bible, they'll have to rewrite the whole justice system.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would think that. What's interesting is how universal, how even in secular law, like Rome, for example, or primary example, these very much were the same rules. I mean, there was always this sort of definition, this distinction between accidental death and intentional death, and the severity of punishments for certain things. You didn't just get to, you didn't always get to have your pound of flesh. There had to be justice. And when that is circumvented is when you see things like rebellion against the rulers, is when they don't execute justice, or they do so to the harm of their people unjustly, is when the people tend to rise up and say, no, this is unjust. We can't get a fair trial. You're just taking whatever you want from us. There's no justice for us. This is, we need to put into place a system of authority that does maintain order and does not show favoritism to one class or another.
You when they swear in a witness, where do you put your hand?
You can put it on the Bible. Some
still
won't.
do that?
No, they. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they still use the Bible or not.
Affirm rather than swear.
So there are some Christian denominations who will take the prohibition of not taking the Lord's name in vain to say that they cannot swear an oath using the Lord's name. That would be a sin. And so they can say, rather than they say, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, you can say, do you affirm that you will tell the truth? Do you.
It's like with a notary public, I was one for many, many years, and you have the person has the option of swearing or affirming.
Right. Yep. Either way, you're making a legal declaration under the penalty of perjury if you tell a lie at that point. So there's really, it's a distinction without a difference. It's semantics. All right. So. Verse 25, the congregation shall rescue the manslayer from the hand of the avenger and restore him to the city of refuge which he had fled. So if they come in and they kidnap him, they can bring him back. And he shall live in it until the death of the high priest who was anointed with holy oil. So basically, if you're found to be guilty of manslaughter, you don't get put to death, but you just have to stay in the city. That becomes where you live. Sounds like prison, but that's where you have to live at that point until there's a transition in the high priest, and then you're set free to be able to go somewhere else.
Is the person set free or just to go to another city of refuge?
So once the high priest dies, then they're set free, it seems.
Period.
Yeah, their sentence has ended. But if the manslayer at any time goes beyond the boundaries of his city of refuge to which he fled, you were asking about this, does he have to stay there? The avenger of the blood finds him outside, then he shall not be guilty of blood. So if he goes outside the city and the avenger does find him, then he can kill him.
But this is while the high priest is still living.
Correct.
If the high priest is dead.
Correct. Yep, for verse 28 is, he must remain in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest, but after that, the manslayer may return to that land of his possession.
Unless he kills the high priest.
I suppose that would be, yeah. If anyone kills a person, they shall be put to death on the evidence of witnesses, but no one shall be put to death on the testimony of one witness. All right, so you have to have two or more witnesses in order to have the death penalty. Because you can't just say, I saw him do it. Well, it's your word against theirs. That is not enough to establish guilt. 31, you shall accept no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death. He shall be put to death. You shall accept no ransom for him who has fled to the city of refuge, that he may return to dwell before the land of the high priest. So you can't pay a fine and get let off. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. This is so Christological. There's so much language about Jesus in this. Don't pollute the land with blood. The blood of Abel cries out from the ground. The blood that went into the ground cries out as a testimony against Cain. And God says the blood cries out for vengeance. And the book of Hebrews says, but we have a better blood, the blood of Jesus that cries out. Whose blood can make atonement for the land? The one who shed the blood. Only Christ can shed his blood to make atonement for the land and for the people. Oh, it's so beautiful.
Right, the second half of verse 33.
Yeah, right. Yep. Except by the blood of the one who shed it. So it's like, Jesus puts himself into the place of all of us murderers, by shedding his blood for us. And so like when the people are shouting, his blood be upon us and upon our children, it's sort of like, that's kind of the point. His blood will be upon you as an atonement, as that atoning sacrifice's blood is sprinkled upon you and redeems the land. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. So the holiness of the land is really established by the fact that God dwells among the people, and the people dwell in the land. Therefore, God dwells in the land, and therefore the land is holy and must not be defiled. Not because the people are in it, but because God is with the people, and the people of God are in the land is what makes it holy. It's the holy land because God dwells in it in the midst of his people. And so when they are taken off into exile to Babylon, God still says, I go with you, and I will bring you back again. And so in a sense, where the people go with God dwelling with them remains holy land for them. So God did not abandon them just because they lost the territory, because he went with them wherever, I will be with you wherever you go sort of thing. He carried the holiness of that land among them. So it's not about the dirt, it's about the people that God dwells with, and where we dwell as God's people being that holy place. Kind of, it's that transference of holiness again. So, all right, how much more do we have here? Oh, should we just finish?
One more chapter.
Yep. Well, yeah. All right, so marriage of female heirs. This is sort of the kinsman redeemer idea. It's like what happens when, remember those ladies were given their inheritance. Their father had died, and then there were these three women who wanted their inheritance. So the Lord commanded my Lord to give a land for an inheritance by lot. To give inheritance to Zelophehad, our brother, and to his daughters. That's who had died. But he says, if they are married to any of the sons of other tribes, then their inheritance will be taken from their fathers and added to that tribe. So it'll be taken away from the lot of our inheritance. I think it's also the idea that if you marry from somebody else's tribe, if you had an inheritance there, it sort of transfers tribes too. And when the Jubilee of the people of Israel comes, then their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry, and their inheritance will be taken from the tribe of our fathers. So yeah, if you get married to somebody from another tribe, then it transfers tribe. If you had that property, if you had inherited that property. Every daughter who possesses inheritance in any tribe of the people. Huh.
It says 12 verse.
So those women could marry somebody from another tribe, but it seems like everybody else, the daughters should marry from their own clan of the tribe of her father, so that every one of the people of Israel possess the inheritance of his father. So he's telling them not to marry among tribes either. Yeah.
No inheritance may pass from tribe to tribe.
Yep.
It says there.
Except for these ladies. If they married outside, they could do that.
Yeah, some could marry outside and transfer.
It was particularly just these ladies, because they were the ones who had come and asked that one time. But they were married to the sons of their father's brothers, and so it all stayed together. And then the final verse, these are the commandments and the rules that the Lord commanded through Moses to the people of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. So there's sort of the end of the in the wilderness time. There's a lot of narrative, a lot of rules, but there's a lot of narrative in there. You can't miss the book of Numbers. You miss the book of Numbers, you miss a lot.
When they talk about returning someone to where they committed a crime, they get what they call it, they extradite the person.
Yeah, so if the man, when they come to do their trial, they got to be taken to, yep.
So Pastor, going back to chapter 32, verse 33, so Moses gave children of Gad and children of Reuben and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So when I look on the map, isn't there the west side of Manasseh and the east side of Manasseh?
Right.
So is it half of this west side?
So half the tribe of Manasseh stayed on the west side, stayed on the east side of the Jordan, and the other half of the tribe of Manasseh took land inside Canaan.
Okay, so the map is already showing the half already,
Yes.
and Joseph, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, it's Joseph's portion among Ephraim and Manasseh.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. All right, I get it.
I know.
Thank you.
So it's sort of it would sort of be the quarter tribe of Manasseh. So it's, because Joseph is split between Ephraim and Manasseh, and then half of Manasseh stays there and the other half goes in. Yep.
Well, some of this is the basis for prenuptial agreement.
I suppose that's true. The trouble with prenuptial agreements is that it presupposes that you're going to divorce.
Yeah.
It's sort of predetermining that, well, we know this isn't going to work out, or it makes it easier to make it not work out. And what you need is not for it to be easier for it to not work out. You need to make it harder for it to not work out so that you have to put the work in so that it stays.
Gotcha.
And you're
That's why no-fault divorce caused the divorce rate to skyrocket. No-fault divorce has been a disaster for the family, and in particular for children. It has been a disaster for one person to just one day up and say, I quit. And then it has to be, there's no assignment of, there doesn't have to be a fault there. There doesn't have to be anything. It can just be, I'm done and I quit, and they file for divorce, and it just gets all divvied up. And there's the concept of no-fault divorce is that there's no blame assigned. It's all treated the same, no matter what the circumstances are, making it that much easier for divorce to take place. Whereas when divorce was harder, you had to do more work to make the commitment stick and work, and that's why it was a lower rate. And within the church, we should encourage, under all circumstances, that we stick out and not divorce if at all possible. Even in the cases that it is permitted, it's not required. So if there is a case of adultery, it's like you may divorce. You don't have to, though. If you do reconcile, great. It's not required that you divorce in those cases, but you may, and even there, we would still try to encourage a reconciliation if it's possible. It may not be possible, and that's fine. But yeah. All right. Well, Deuteronomy next week. I would just keep going.
Sounds like a plan.
If we're going to do the Pentateuch, we might as well do the whole set. So Deuteronomy is a little bit interesting. It's sort of its farewell address, and it's a recap of a lot of the things, so we won't necessarily go through each and every detail of it. We'll just do an overview of what those things, because we've kind of gone over the details more in particular. We will talk a little bit about how Deuteronomy plays into the discussion of authorship of the Old Testament. The fact that there is this recap book has led some scholars who don't want to attribute Old Testament authorship to Moses or the divinity of God to say, well, you know, somebody wrote Deuteronomy, somebody wrote Numbers, somebody wrote Leviticus, because they got all this common material, but it's a little bit different in all these places. So people with different emphases did different editing to kind of mix it all together and things. We have like 4 different authors possibly, or schools of thought possibly doing all this work to edit these things. I mean, there's no reason to suggest that other than to say it's attributed to Moses. Jesus attributes the authorship to Moses. So if you say Moses didn't write it, then you don't just have a Moses problem.
Jesus problem.
You got a Jesus problem at that point, which is much more significant. So we'll talk a little bit about that so that you can identify that discussion if it ever comes up in other places. So, all right. See you later.